Welcome to another episode, Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. I'm your host. Joining me today is Katherine Page, who some of you may remember I initially was co-host with when we started this podcast together over 2 years ago. And Katherine's been good enough to join me again today. It's been a long time since we caught up, and we've got just wonderful conversation for you today, ad hoc as always. We love to banter off the cuff. But before we dive into the loose topics that we had in mind today, I wanted to remind everybody that voting for the Women in Podcasting Awards is open May 1st through May 31st. So we're almost halfway through the voting period. And this show, Living with FASD, is in the running for the category of society and culture. So if you would be so kind as to go to the show notes and click the link. For those of you who are listening, it is womenpodcasters.com/awards-voting. But click that link, then you're going to find the tab for categories. You're going to scroll down to society and culture. And then with that drop-down menu, you will scroll down to my name and the show name. So Patricia Kasper, Living with FASD, and cast your vote. Winning the category means visibility for the podcast, which means a lot of people who may never have heard of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders are going to learn about it. So I appreciate any and all help you can give me for that. There are prizes. I actually don't even know what they are because it's the visibility and awareness that is so important to me. So without any further ado, Katherine, so good to have you back. I have missed you, girl.
Well, I have missed you too. And I've missed also talking with a fellow person in our situation, that meaning someone that has this condition and is also in a position to educate others. That, it's a perspective that's unique, not technically unique, but, it's not common. It's really not common. I think because, the world looks at us and listens to us and thinks, wow, she's got it pretty well together. And because we're both really good talkers. And that's so often, like so many of our fellow, fetal alcohol people, fools a lot of people into thinking, yeah, your organization and planning and executive functioning, et cetera, is great. And so glitches are misinterpreted and misunderstood. And that I was kind of thinking about checking in with you today to see, how many of your friends and associates indicate that they really get it or indicate that they really don't.
Yeah. I had a couple thoughts come up as you were first getting into what you just shared. One is that I think one of the reasons why it seems like we are so rare to both have fetal alcohol spectrum disorders and to educate about it is that I think, at least for those of us who did not realize on the spectrum until later in life, I think a lot of people's reaction to us was smart people are weird. They have no idea to attribute it to FASD and therefore discount the disability end of it, right? Because, oh, well, look how fantastic he or she is doing. They don't need help. What are they talking about, right? Totally discounting the whole thing about being on a spectrum and that everyone is affected differently. The other thing that comes to mind when you ask the question is it took a long time for me to decide to share with others what was going on with me. And when I finally got the nerve up to talk with my supervisor at work at the time, she just said, "That's not a surprise." I'm like, what? And I'm thinking, was I wearing my FASD out loud? I mean, was it obvious? And when I got that quizzical look on my face, she goes, "Well, you just say and do odd things from time to time." And I just, put it on my little mental check sheet. Oh, well, that's just a Patti thing. She never had the identification to help her understand my quirks. And so I think that might be part of it too. She's actually one of the few people that has ever said anything to me about me in that way.
And you actually brought it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And when I did finally get a diagnosis to confirm my self-identification this past summer. Diagnosed NDPAE, which is neurodevelopmental disorders attributed to prenatal alcohol exposure. And the practitioner who gave me the diagnosis, I had told her that I was also suspecting ADHD. And that's something that you and I have talked about before, is that overlap between these two disorders, right? I hate that word. But, I mentioned it to a good friend who I used to work with at that agency, and she just started laughing at me. And she's like, "Patti, I've known you had ADHD since I first met you 7 years ago."
is that because you lose track of thoughts and stuff and you blurt and you're impatient? Is that
It's
sort of the
it's
general
those things
package?
and my mind going a mile a minute,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
always looking at things from different angles, and yeah.
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 God, something just occurred to me. Oh, I curious. I think we've had this conversation before, but I can't remember why you don't like the term disorder.
Just because it's got such that negative consequence, or not consequence, that negative
Connotation?
yeah, connotation, right?
Yeah.
People think that and they just go, you know, and I think, given the reality that there's no two people the same, neurotypical versus neurodiverse, we prefer neurodiverse over neurodivergent because the reality is no two people are the same. We all of us have a unique combination of challenges and strengths and interests and preferences and preferred learning styles, and experiences. So we react to everything uniquely out of our unique lens. And if we use the word disorder, that implies that there's a normal, and we're not that.
Well, and I am gonna argue with you,
Okay.
with your permission, which I think I just
Absolutely.
got.
I mean, we're
Um,
we're good for that, right, Katherine?
we
We're
are good for that. And
sharpening each other's swords, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah. Um, I can't remember if you do know. I used to work as a school psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as a clinical psychologist, and part of both of those, but especially in the school psych, there's a lot of testing. I
Right.
mean, that's like 90% of what it is. Um, and with clinical, it's diagnosis. And some of that is based on testing. Much of it is just clinical impressions, but
Yeah.
the whole idea is that there is a bell curve on everything. It's not just a spectrum, but it's a bell curve where there is a normal in the middle. It's
Mm-hmm.
where most people are. And then there's the outliers on both ends. And pretty much everything about us is on that bell curve. Our height, our the loudness of our voice, that, I mean, you name it, everything is. And pick any attribute and you could be really good at it or really, have impairment in it. You can be really challenged by it. And from where I sit, I would never pick having fetal alcohol damage ever. I have struggled with feeling different and memory and planning and sensory issues, struggled with because I'm not normal in those. I am like well below normal. Um, and so I do appreciate the term disorder, although I often use the term condition,
Mhm.
because stuff is not working right in my brain. I know it isn't, and I know that I am not normal. If there is a normal, which I'm going to assume, I think I have to, because that's the reality, I believe. Uh, and I'm outside it. And so having a disorder is really so much preferable to being lazy, being crazy, being thoughtless, being
No doubt.
irresponsible, which is what I called myself
Yeah.
until, until I first got my diagnosis of ADHD and then fetal alcohol.
Mhm.
So that was a long-winded way of, lobbying for the use of the term disorder.
Yeah.
Because it's,
And,
yeah.
and I appreciate that logic, and that makes a lot of sense. And my mind, I'm sure you could probably even see the smoke rising from my head because
Because you just picked a pope, I know.
my mind was spinning. My mind was spinning on seeing these two diagrams, right? Seeing the diagram of the bell curve, right? With the median factors in the middle and then the outliers on each side, but then also looking at my 3D model of spectrum. I laid it out in Sip by Sip second edition in the book, this conceptualization that I came up with about why thinking of spectrum disorders, particularly FASD, as a linear thing with high functioning on one end and low functioning on the other. I mean, that's typically how we conceptualize a spectrum, right? Is linearly, why it doesn't work well
Right,
with
right.
us.
Because there's so many different areas.
Yeah.
And
So
we
I
can
think of
have,
us as being three-dimensional.
yeah, right.
In fact, I would say we're four-dimensional, with time being the fourth.
Uh-huh.
But I just have no way of knowing how to draw that. All right.
Well,
Katherine,
it would have to be a movie. It couldn't just be a one moment in time picture. It would have to be, you know,
mhm.
a movie over time.
All right. I'm going to let you talk while I look for this on my computer files.
Okay, you're gonna let me talk, are you? God, that's a little dangerous.
Put you on the
Um,
spot. Tell me what
So,
you're doing up here. I mean, you
well,
came you
well,
came back to work on a project.
I don't think we're done with that first paragraph, the one about how your friends and dear ones relate to you,
Yeah.
and do they, your supervisor was one of the very few, but beyond that,
Well, she told me I had to tell the woman who was over both of us. And when I sat down and told her, she was like, "Okay, so now that you know, what are you going to do about it?" And I'm just thinking, what part of accommodations do you not understand?
Yeah.
They're environmental. They come from outside of myself.
But did she know what you needed in the way of accommodations?
She had no clue. She wanted me to tell her what I needed, exactly what I needed, without recognizing the fact that I was just stepping into this framework as applied to my own self.
Yeah. And so you didn't really, you weren't so clear on what you needed.
I wasn't at the time, and I was not
Yeah.
prepared.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
thanked her for her time and
Uh,
muttered as I walked back down the hall.
yeah. If you could replay it, what would you say now, knowing, having a better idea of the
Um,
accommodations that are helpful?
oh golly. I
You wanted me to
probably
talk,
would
which
have
isn't fair.
I probably would have asked for some help structuring things at work so that I didn't lose track of things.
Yeah.
You know, when you're dealing with kids and families and social work, there's crises that come up at the drop of a hat, and it's so easy to let go of threads that may or may not be important,
Right.
you know, or deadlines or whatever the case is.
Yep.
One of the things that I've come to appreciate about myself as far as quote unquote deficits go, right, where I'm on the low side of that bell curve, is visual attention to detail. That's not me. I'm very visually oriented in terms of looking at visually beautiful things feeds my soul and is medicine and is calming and all that jazz. But when it comes to attention to detail, that's that's not one of my strengths.
So I just wonder what accommodation, because I'm not very good at thinking of accommodations even now. And I'm just wondering with that visual attention, the attention to visual detail, what accommodation would be helpful to you on that?
Well, for instance, one thing would be get someone else to do the home inspections.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Yeah. What about talking through it? I mean,
Oh,
sometimes I find that my visual capacity isn't so great either, but verbal really is.
mhm.
So, like looking at a graph, I have to talk through it.
Yeah,
I don't get it from just looking at it. Yeah, that whole thing of accommodations, though, first of all, trying to figure out for ourselves what would really help.
yeah.
It's not that easy. And then trying to
Um,
convey that to our friends, our coworkers, of what would be helpful.
yeah,
It's, the main thing that occurs to me to say is, when something happens that just strikes you as like, where is she coming from?
mhm.
Would you mind just verbalizing that to me, checking it out with me, asking me what that's about? So I ask people the favor of doing something that they normally wouldn't in polite company, which is to, you said this thing and I'm not sure what you meant. It struck me funny. Could you explain it? Is not something that people usually do. And
Yeah,
so I ask people that favor.
yeah.
That's one thing.
And is that uncomfortable for you?
Oh yeah. Oh God, yeah. Yeah. I think, as asking for accommodation, unless it's something really concrete, really expectable, really easy to do, I think it is uncomfortable.
Mhm, mhm.
It is uncomfortable for me and it's uncomfortable for the other person because usually it has to do with um I'm asking them to kind of re-examine their own reactions, really.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
And
And
I've lost at least one friend
Mhm.
because of that.
I think there can be a lot of interpersonal conflicts that come up when, as being neurodiverse people, we tend to enjoy being around other neurodiverse people because it feels safer. We get it. We understand that we're both, neither one of us is neurotypical, right? So there are not those hard and fast expectations about how things should be done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also common. The downside of that is when one person gets their dander up about something, right? Has that last straw kind of moment that often triggers an equally strong reaction in someone else. And then you're just poking each other, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that can be very challenging to navigate.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And um, one of the really common areas in fetal alcohol is dysregulation.
Mhm.
And that we're more prone to it. It happens easier. It's harder to soothe over. And no matter what you say to yourself, it still happens.
Mhm.
You can say to yourself, come on, it's not that important, lighten up, but inside. And I think it's true for you too, but tell me if I'm wrong, that you are an internalizer rather than an externalizer. So you're not going to be throwing dishes across the room. You're going to be turning it inward when
Most
you get
part.
upset.
There have been times of, shutting the cupboard doors with enthusiasm.
Ah, yeah, right.
There has occasionally been that externalizing bit.
And
And
you
I
were
think
kind of
that's
riffing
because
on
I'm
that.
such an intellectual kind of person. I
Yeah,
retreat that way. I'm more intellectual than I am emotional. But
yeah.
I mean, this just goes to show how nuanced everything is, right? Yeah, and I'm lost again. You got me thoroughly off track.
Well, I think you were ready to switch subjects anyway, but I was
Yeah,
stubbornly clinging to the one about how do your friends and family treat this condition of yours and do they
yeah.
understand? And, what is
Well,
it like
I
when
think
they do or don't?
yeah. I've had the one friend say, I've known you had ADHD since I first met you, and being very caught off guard by that as I had been by my first supervisor to whom I disclosed it, saying, "Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me."
Yeah, were you curious about what it was that led them each to say that?
I think, oh gosh, I don't think it's anything beyond what I've already disclosed. And kind of like the ADHD thing, when you started talking about bell curve, I'm immediately trying to figure out how am I going to merge these two visual paradigms into one. And I'm going to be pondering that. Thank you very much.
All right, then. All right. Well, I do expect, and then you're going to add the fourth dimension. So
Yeah, so that'll be in another book.
well, I do think that you're going to need to do a movie for that. So you're going to need to branch out in your media.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think
So
I'm
what
staying.
have your experiences been with that?
Well, I was just thinking, I think the reason that I'm kind of sticking to that subject and um is that I have just recently had an experience with a friend, not a real old friend, but somebody that um we have had a great time intellectually, get together and talk about great ideas. And she has such a hard time with she puts it, being unwilling to let go of things.
Mhm.
But what's happening is I'm trying to get clarity. I don't have clarity. And if somebody can just spell out the darn thing for me in really concrete terms,
Mhm.
more concrete than you think I need, then I can get it. And then I'll remember it. I'll make use of it. I'm happy to know what you're actually thinking.
Mhm.
But to get there, it was irritating to her to have to spell,
Everything out.
because I would like ask, okay, and so then is it like this? Blah, blah, blah. Is it like that? Oh, okay. So it's like,
Yeah.
and she just, I think her expectation was that I was much quicker than that, and I was unnecessarily dragging my feet,
Mhm.
you know, I don't know to what, but I mean, why would a person?
You know,
Anyway,
I'm thinking that is needing that much clarity is a
yeah.
wonderful strength for being a therapist,
Oh, yeah,
where the goal is to guide somebody in making their own self discoveries.
exactly.
But I can also see where that would be very frustrating for someone who is in a more casual friendship kind of role.
Well,
From
uh,
their perspective, right?
if we're,
Definitely a strength for therapy.
yeah, but even if we're not talking about personal stuff, we're talking
Mhm.
about some, government philosophy or something, and I'm not quite getting her point.
Yeah.
So, no, for therapy, honestly, and so is uh I have a little bit of a lack of empathy.
Mhm.
It's a little bit of that thread, the autistic thread that runs through me. But so it doesn't come naturally to me. I don't instantly know what you're feeling.
Yeah.
And so I have to ask. I ask and ask some more. And where do you feel it in your body? And what recollections does that bring up? And what meaning do you make of that? And it really comes from, I don't have an instant take.
Yeah.
But if you tell me, I'm right there.
Yeah.
And
You know,
that is,
I'm gonna
yeah,
flip that around on you again, Katherine.
yeah,
The strength in that
yeah.
is that you won't make the mistakes of assumptions.
Oh, right, right, right. And I am kind of opposed to making assumptions in the first place, philosophically and by nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it drives me nuts when other people do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's as hard to put up with as someone who's constantly exaggerating. I hit a nerve.
No, no, it never occurred to me, and it makes me think that you're speaking from experience.
Uh, well, there are people that are very grandiose, right? I mean, everything is
Yeah.
the biggest, it's the best, it's the
Oh, God,
worst,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
and and so,
yeah.
that can create a number of conflicts, right?
Yeah, and we won't even begin to get into politics here, will we?
Well, he's not the only one. I
Yeah,
think
true.
most people have personal connections with people that do that.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
who mean nothing awful by it at all. Sometimes it's just enthusiasm. And anyway, and yet there are
Well,
also people that interpret that as lying. Yeah, I don't buy that at all, but
oh, well, you are a really generous person. No, you are. You're non-judgmental, you're very forgiving, and I have enough experience of you to know that this is true. It really is. I am a little more judgmental than that, and somebody that exaggerates all the time to me. I mean, I have a real affinity for the truth.
mhm,
And
mhm.
when somebody veers away from it, it's like fingernails on a blackboard to me,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. But is that not a characteristic common among many of us, though, that affinity for the truth? It's
I think it is. Yeah. Yeah,
that
I
need
do.
for fairness,
Right.
right? Yeah.
And, I keep seeing threads of other diagnosed conditions running through us. And
Hmm.
that's one of those threads of it's a little Asperger's-ish,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But think about all the commonalities between FASD and ASD. I mean, so
Yeah.
many people are mistakenly diagnosed with autism spectrum because it's what the clinicians are more familiar with. And there's enough presenting that looks like that. We'll call it that. Then there are people that say it looks a lot like this. I'm not convinced, but there's a lot of services. So we'll run with it,
Exactly.
but others have said if we just assume that if we use the brain as the centralized concept that houses all these other things, and we think of symptoms instead of diagnostic labels, we'll arrive at the truth for that individual a lot more quickly with a lot
Yeah.
less confusion, and be able
Right.
to arrive at tailored accommodations more directly.
You're so right. And I just think there's so much energy wasted on differential diagnosis.
Hmm.
Is it
Yeah.
A or is it B? Well, it's B caused by A.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're so siloed in the way we think about things, right? And every different diagnosis in the DSM is its own little silo. But the problem is when there's multiple silos in one client, if you're thinking just with the siloed thinking, then it gets really confusing. Well, I know what treatment to recommend if it's this, but if there's these elements from that, well, then how do I shift things? And oh, there's these over here. And it
Yeah.
gets really, really confusing. Whereas if we just say, this is, Johnny's brain.
Yeah. Boy,
Let's look
I would like to think that the field is moving in that direction. I really would. It's been a
at,
long time since I was, since I studied, but back then it sure was. I mean, in your boards exam, to get your degree, you had to do an accurate differential diagnosis over and over on different things. And so it was really, you were all about
I had to
picking
do
one
that to earn
versus
my
the other.
master's
Ah,
from school. We had 5 case presentations and we had to run through the differential diagnosis on 3 out of the 5. We could pick 3, but we had to say why was this and why did we rule other things out. But the catch was we weren't allowed to refer to the DSM, which means we had to memorize it.
right,
And
right,
then there's practical me thinking, come on, in the real world, it's
right.
on it's on people's desks for a
Uh,
reason.
It's it's absolutely true. Yeah, no, it's just
Yeah. So that's a challenge
yeah.
when you have a disorder that has memory challenges very common.
Well, this is one of those ways that difference shows up.
Hmm.
My working memory is toast. I mean, like, where did I put my keys is sort of like,
Yeah.
but remembering volumes of material, what page it's on, what it looks like, I can do that. I can do it. Too bad I can't make a living just having, remembering trivial
Yeah.
stuff. I don't mean to imply that I can't make a living, but I really
Well, I
wish
was
that
thinking you could be a contestant on Jeopardy.
there you go. I really, I mean, I was thinking I have a couple of real God-given talents, and one is I can talk backwards. And I could do it when I was like really little. And I always have thought, if only there was a market for that, but never did discover it. Remembering trivial information, that as well.
Hmm.
So I have 6 minutes to go before I need to jam.
Yes. So,
What else did we want to talk about today?
oh, um, so I know you've been up back in California working on a project. Do you want to mention what that is?
I finished with one round of training, a really long one for Los Angeles County, training their Department of Mental Health, 60 trainings. That's done. And now I'm in the middle of working with UC Davis, training social workers across California on fetal alcohol, and that's ongoing.
That's
There's one in May, that one's full. There's another one in September, and I think that one still has some room. So if
that.
anybody, if any, it's open to anybody, it's free. It's 2 3-hour sessions, and it does cover diagnosis. So anybody in a position that's already diagnosing ADHD, there's no reason on earth that you can't bone up a little bit on fetal alcohol and
Yeah,
following the DSM,
yeah.
start providing that diagnosis. So,
That excites me so much.
yeah,
Because, when I got my master's, yeah, it was unheard of.
right,
We were not trained in adoption or foster care, and all those traumas and this system induced trauma. We were not trained in, the psychological adoption issues,
right.
which, because it's a primitive loss. We
Yeah,
weren't, certainly weren't trained in the effects of prenatal exposures to drugs or
right,
alcohol, anything like that.
right.
To learn any of that, you had to be curious enough and persistent enough to seek that training out and go after it. And if you're lucky, then your employer would pay you back.
Right.
But I'm really excited that you're doing that.
Well, if we can make diagnosis more accessible,
Accessible. Hmm.
then so many dark and murky little corners will be illuminated.
Yeah.
They don't have
No,
to be that murky.
for me, it's really been a gift
Oh,
because, and I'm sure you feel the same way going through life. And, I had a neighbor who I really felt, the child she was caring for needed to be assessed. I brought that up a couple times, and she's like, I
um,
don't want a label being attached to him.
right, right.
But the behavior itself is attaching a label.
You bet.
And,
Yeah. And her own parenting was probably acquiring some labels.
yeah, yeah. So, that I think that's one thing that people need to be aware of. But, when you get that formal label, it provides a framework by which we can say, oh, it's not my choice. I'm not being willful, stubborn, lazy, unmotivated, blah, 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 blah. all those things that you mentioned at the beginning. And we can put the onus on, I have brain-based differences that are not my fault. And once you can wrap your head around that, then you can have self-acceptance and understanding and grace.
Exactly.
That would not have come in other ways. So and then there's others in the field now who are like, who cares about diagnosis? Let's just get about the business of accommodating, and changing society's willingness to accept others for the way they are. And I hear that too.
That's a very big task. We,
Huge.
changing society in any direction, I think I don't want to wait for that.
Yeah.
I want to keep working at it, but in the meantime,
I think,
a diagnosis is really so helpful. If for nothing else, letting a parent know to Google the darn thing and look for support groups and look for, Nate Sheets's videos and your coaching and your book.
Yeah.
And or this podcast, but without that diagnosis, at least without the hypothesis, it's not going to occur to a person. So they miss out on resources like that. And it is now 2:00 and I am expected elsewhere. And let me just say what a pleasure it's been hanging out with you, Patti.
Always.
And whoever else is here.
All right. I'm sending huge hugs to you, Katherine.
Same from me to you. And thanks so much for doing this. And until the next time.
Let's not wait so long till we
Okay.
do this again.
Deal.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. Feel free to send comments, questions, and topics you'd like to learn more about, hear more about, to me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. Please remember to like, follow, and share this podcast on whatever platform you use so that more people can find the podcast. Have a blessed week, everyone, and tune in next Monday for another candid conversation on Living with FASD.